Hey everyone, Dan here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. And keep in mind that these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not meant to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put in the work for yourself, and make your decisions based on that. Enjoy.
All right, folks, here we are on Friday, December 27th. We're going to take a look at XPEV today. So XPEV's been sort of waffling around this 1337 level for quite some time. I know it's pushed down periodically to this like 1155. It's also jumped up periodically to this 1540. But really sort of the battle in my eyes right now is 1337. Is this going to let it go and flip this to resistance and maybe need to wrestle more with the 1155, or is it going to be able to flip this to support and then make a more consistent run and try to start wrestling with this 1540? Now I know there's a huge percentage price gap in between there, right? The percentage change from 1337 to 1540 is a lot. Same thing with 1337 to 1155. I did that just, to me, those are the most important or the strongest levels. But there are certainly some more granular levels in between. So just keep that in mind. But I didn't want to kind of clutter and crowd the chart and cause that to sort of be its own issue. You see the big gap down overnight Thursday and Friday, and that's sort of what just shoved it off of that 1337 level. It was trying yesterday. Strong approach to the 1337 came down, and then it just couldn't hold it as the day went on, and then it really stuck it to it overnight. But we do see it's been on sort of a pretty solid push here. XPEV compared to some other stocks, I mean, I know it's been, it's drawn down quite heavily from these days where it was 3 or 4x the price now, but compared to some other small and certainly players in China and whatnot, to my eye, it is holding on a little bit better. I know that's hard to say if you bought up in the 20s or even in the high teens or certainly the 30s and 40s. But this motion off of this 655 area that we saw between April and then into August, and the push off of that has been significant and to this point at least has held pretty well. And we do see a ton of previous price action here that it tried really hard to hang on from this 1540 up to this like 1973. So I do think there's potential that if it can get motion back to that 1540, which again it had relatively recently, right? This was happening in November. If we can get action back into that range, there might be some real interest of gobbling up some shares and some buying pressure coming into this range. We'll have to see if it can even get there, right? That's going to be the first most important thing. So again, to my eye, the best way for it to get there is to not lose this 1337 level, not replace wrestling with the 1337 with wrestling with the 1155. If it slips that, you can see the other levels that we have down here that bring it back into the single digits. But if it can get some legs and wrestle through this 1711 and then maybe this 1973 as time marches on, we do then have a level up here at 2239. And then like you saw when we scroll up here, there's a lot of price action to go off of. So if XPEV can continue to upswing as we get into 2025, at least the upswing that we've seen in this last quarter or so of 2024, if that can continue into and through 2025, maybe we take a significant bite out of the chunk that it has lost over the last several years, and we can fill in some of the gaps there as we go. Now, if we take a look at the EMAs for the moment, here's what it's looking like. And now it's a little bit messy with these short-term EMAs, but to me, here's sort of like the important things at the moment. One, down here, everything was in a bearish formation, obviously, and then it had a few attempts to flip to bullish, and it just kept shoving off and flipping bearish again. And then when this run initiated and it came through the 183 EMA, it just pushed really hard these short-term EMAs, bullish crossovers through the 183, and then since then, this red 34 EMA has been holding pretty steady. There's been some outliers, these candles down here, and even sort of these ones down here, that those are more wrestling with the level. And we see right now it's wrestling with the 34 EMA as well. But if it can continue to hold that and we don't get significant bearish crossover happening, there was a sort of a short-term bearish crossover here, but the 8 didn't slip below the 34. So, it didn't sort of like press that down further. To my eye, as long as these don't get flipped, there's the potential there. If they do get flipped bearish, then what my hope would be for it to hold that 183 EMA. There is always the possibility that we zoom out on this, down the road, and it looks sort of like came up, struggled to hold these low teens a bit, came down and sort of reconfirmed at or near the 183 EMA, and then it really took off. Now, likely it will need some strong catalysts to continue to make this motion. I'm just talking about the chart perspective. So obviously keep in mind, however you want to source that for yourself, or go look at some information that is targeted just at the fundamentals of XPEV, the potential catalysts ahead, and what would be important to shareholders in order to come in long and strong. Definitely take a look at that, because I do think that's going to be needed here. But just from a charting perspective, that's what I'm talking about, what the look would be here. We actually we'd have pretty solid shelving here for the volume, and then there's a distinct lack of volume in this range, at least for the last, say, 6 months or so, or more, maybe closer to 8 months. So I do wonder if it were to dip down here. We were just looking, the EMA for the 183 is getting just a bit above. It's just trying to get out of where there's a real deficit in volume here. If it were to fall into that range, and that deficit is there and the 183 doesn't hold, it could, if it needs to get to these shelves for it to pick up, then you're going to have a pretty big percentage loss there, at least for that period of time. But we'll see. If this shelving can continue to hold up, then there might be in okay shape there. But I do think all important on the EMAs here, certainly for that 183 to hold, but even for these short terms, to even if the 8 crosses below the 21 temporarily, for there to not be crossovers of the 34, pretty important to my eye and to my mind. So XPEV on the Thinkorswim side of things, we do have a couple of trigger candles right now happening on the TTM squeeze indicator. So we'll see if that sets off any fireworks. Let's see, there was like a very brief trigger and fire here, and that sort of set off this roller coaster. We had this little dip back down before it really took off, and pulled it from like the 6s up to the 15 range there. So really good quick percentage gain. That was actually that really quick double trigger and fire was actually a re-trigger and fire from this lengthy trigger and fire that didn't really amount to anything, and then a brief re-trigger and lengthy fire, and that set off the big move here, and now we're getting the beginnings of a trigger. So we'll see if this is a quick one, a long one, and then when it does fire, if there's anything that sets off, or if we want to look for sort of down the road, but near term down the road, not months and months and months down the road, but maybe a week or two after it does fire, if nothing kind of happens, if there can be a re-triggering sort of set in place, that could get pretty interesting for sure. ATR wise, even with all this motion, it hasn't been able to stretch the full 1 ATR very often. We got one here in September, right, where it came in off the call trigger here and stretched the full +1 ATR to about 13 there. But then even with this, jumpy motion that we had in November, when it shot up here, it didn't get to the full +1 ATR, which would have been about 1640 or so. December, it's had some motion at or over the call trigger, but that hasn't seemed to make it want to really push at all. In January, the call trigger right now is set at 1388 with a +1 ATR all the way up to 1771. So we'll see if there can be anything that sort of takes shape based off the TTM squeeze indicator, sort of forecasting a potential for an outsized move coming up. Just keep in mind, outsized move doesn't mean that it goes to the upside. It could also go to the downside. So January put trigger situated at 1151 right now with a -1 ATR all the way down into the single digits at 767. So we'll see if any of those fireworks get set off with the TTM squeeze indicator currently triggering. All right, folks, so I hope that you had a good trading week and that you enjoy your weekend. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.